Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Batra. We are up to Perek Vav Mishnah Gimel. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilui Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbai V'Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov Chana ben Miriam Sason ben Ryan Yoshua ben Shifra Menuchatam Began Eden Amen and Avdi ben Chaim Lechaim V'Derefua Shelemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa Betoch Shachule Israel and Achlama Merav Binamin Od Zion Chai ben Dvorah. The previous Mishnah discussed how much inferior wine a buyer must accept when he buys wine to be used a bit at a time for cooking. This Mishnah discusses what happens if the wine was checked and found to be fresh at the time of the sale, but it spoiled later after the buyer took it home. If someone sells wine to his fellow and it turned into vinegar after he brought it home, and the seller is not responsible to pay for it, even if the buyer has specified that he was planning on using the wine slowly for cooking. Since the buyer poured the wine into his own jugs when he bought it, the seller can say that impurities in the buyer's jug caused the wine to spoil. The seller cannot claim that the buyer should have used the wine right away because the buyer told him that he was buying it for cooking. Nevertheless, since the buyer poured the wine into his own jugs, the seller is not liable because he can claim that the wine spoiled because the jugs of the buyer were dirty. But if the seller sold the wine in jugs and the wine was still in those jugs, then he is liable if it spoils because the buyer can say to him, you knew I was buying the wine for cooking and the wine is still in the jugs you sold me, so it's your fault that the wine spoiled. If the buyer did not specify that the wine was to be used for cooking, then the seller is not liable even if the wine is still in the original jugs because he can say that the buyer should have used the wine right away. But if it is known that this seller's wine never keeps well and always turns into vinegar when it is not consumed right away, meaning it is discovered that this seller's wine spoils every year if it's not immediately consumed, then if the wine spoils, it's considered a mistaken sale and the seller must refund the money. Since the seller knows that his wine never keeps well, he should have told the buyer that his wine was not suitable for use as cooking wine. Because he did not tell him, the sale is void. Now this law too applies only when the buyer stated that he was buying the wine to be used gradually for cooking, but if it did not say so, then even in this case, the seller is not liable, even though his wine spoils every year, because the buyer should have consumed the wine immediately. Now, in some cases, the seller is required to guarantee that his wine will remain fresh and drinkable for a longer time. But if the seller said to him, I am selling you superior flavorful wine which does not spoil as quickly, he must provide wine that will keep until Shavuot. If the seller says that his wine is superior, it must remain unspoiled through the wine season, which begins after the grape harvest at Sukkot, at least until Shavuot. The heat of the summer, however, can spoil even superior wine. Now, the final two cases of the Mishnah discuss the sale of vintage wine. The Yashan, and if the seller said, I am selling you old wine, Mishel Eshtakad, he must provide wine that is from last year, meaning wine that was produced during the previous season, which is already over a year old, and the wine must remain fresh until the end of the present season. It must last through the summer and until Sukkot, which is the time of the new grape harvest. Yushan, and if the sale was of aged wine, Mishel Shalosh Shanim, he must provide wine from 2 seasons ago, which will be 3 years old by the end of the present season. Aged wine, which is older than old wine, must last for a total of 3 years, the 2 previous seasons, and the entirety of this season until Sukkot. Now, these rules applied in earlier times when wine spoiled much more readily. With today's bottling and preservation methods, different guidelines would apply. And that is in the Mishnah Gimel. The next Mishnah, Mishnah Daled, discusses laws that apply to the sale of land for building houses and to contracts to build houses. If someone sells a lot to his fellow so that he can build a house on it, and similarly, if someone accepts a contract from his fellow to build a house for him, he must provide a lot or build a house of the proper size for the particular type of house that was agreed upon, and each type of house is a different minimum size, as the Mishnah will explain. Bet chatnut libno, if the contract was for a newlywed's house for his son, ubet al minut libito, or a widow's house for his daughter. Now, in those times, people would build small one-room houses near their own homes for their sons when they got married, or for their daughters if they were widowed and were returning to live near their father's family. Married sons generally did not live near their mother-in-laws. Boneh 4 amot al 6, he must build a house or provide a lot that measures at least 4 amot by 6 amot. Div Rabbi Akiva, these are the words of Rabbi Akiva. Now, there are different opinions as to the length of an amah. They range between 18.9 to 23.6 inches. So 4 by 6 amot would equal between 60 to 93 square feet. A second Tana disagrees. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, but Rabbi Shmuel says, Refet Bakaruzah, a house that is this small is fit only for a stable. Rabbi Akiva, however, holds that a stable would be even smaller than 4 by 6 amot. But Rabbi Shmuel says, Harotzeh la'asot refet bakar, for one who wishes to build a stable for his animal or accepts a contract to build such a stable. Boneh 4 amot al 6, builds a stall that is 4 amot by 6 amot. A house for newlyweds or a widow, though, must be somewhat larger. The Mishnah does not explain how large a newlyweds or widow's house must be according to Rabbi Shmuel. The Mishnah lists sizes for other types of houses. Bait katan 6 al 8. If the contract was for a small house, now this measurement also applies to one who contracts for a house without specifying a size, because this is the smallest size house that would be built if it is not built for a newlywed or a widow. The seller must provide, in this case of a small house, a lot or build a house of at least 6 by 8 amot. Gadol 8 al 10. If it was for a big house, the seller must provide a lot or build a house of at least 8 by 10 amot. Traklin 10 al 10. If it was for an official's mansion, the latter house must be at least 10 by 10 amot. The Mishnah teaches how high the houses must be. Rumo kachatzi oko v'chatzi rochbo. The height of each house must be equal to half its length plus half its width. So a newlywed's or widow's house must be 5 amot high. A small house 7 amot high. A large house 9 amot high. An official's mansion 10 amot high. Rayana davar echal. A proof to this matter can be brought from the height of the echal, the temple building that was built by King Solomon. The echal was 40 amot long and 20 amot wide. Now this refers to the front part of the temple building without the Holy of Holies. The second temple was even taller, but we required the seller to provide only the smallest standard as found in the first temple. It was 40 amot long, 20 amot wide, and it was 30 amot high. Now this is the formula that is followed when determining how high each type of house must be. Another Tana disagrees with this formula. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Akol ki binyan ha'echal. Does everyone build their houses to be like the echal? Of course not. A temple was the grandest building in the land. It cannot be used as a standard for personal construction. According to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, houses must be built to whatever standard is common in each community. And that is the Botai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.